wonderful Holocaust story. And again, no matter how many stories you read, they all grab you. There's one in the New York Times today by Bret Stephens I was reading early this morning. The name of it is "You Will Likely Not See Your Next Birthday," about an amazing story about two Holocaust survivors. First, I want to thank Jeff for always his tireless work in making this service so easy to work with here. And just thank you, Jeff. And for all of you for being here and for the role that you play in the service. It truly is a partnership. The parsha we have this week, Emor, has over one-tenth, of the mitzvot of the 613 mitzvot. The only parsha that has more is Ki Titzei, which has 74 of the 613. Many of these deal with and they're both ritual and then also the ethical mitzvot. Not surprisingly, I'm going to focus today on one of the ethical mitzvot, but the ritual ones deal primarily with the priest and the high priest. And I remember in rabbinical school, Neil Gilman, who was the philosopher of the conservative movement and a Kohen, could not go to anybody's funeral, except if it was your wife or your children, a brother, not a married sister, but only close relatives, and you would be defiling yourself if you went. And I never understood that concept, but it has to do with death and their fear of death. But even if you sat in the back row of the synagogue, and he belonged to a large synagogue on the Upper West Side, the notion is that whatever that impurity that's coming from the deceased body, it goes up. And because you're in a closed space, it would come down on you and you would somehow become ritually impure. And that only applied to the priest and the high priest. He could wait outside, and that's what he would do to show his respect. He would wait outside when he went to a funeral. And you can read it over. It's led to so much patriarchy in the world, and to this day. And it's a shame because the restrictions only applied to the priest and high priest. For example, the priest and high priest could not marry a divorced woman. They had to marry a virgin. And it's created this double standard that still exists today, unfortunately, among some of my students. But again, it was limited to the priest and high priest and dealt with a concept that I'm going to address a little bit, but it's that notion of what's tahor and ritually pure. We don't, in our world today, don't deal with what's ritually pure and impure. The priest could not be in any way. This was my niece's bat mitzvah, and she excoriated this particular Torah portion because it limits, the priest has to be perfect. He can't have any kind of a handicap, a challenge. It has to be the perfect species of the human species. But that all goes to this ritual purity and only to the priest and high priest. It was fine for the average Israelite to marry a divorced woman, for example, with no restrictions at all on that. But I want to focus on one particular ethical mitzvah. And it's one that's so important that the Talmud teaches that as part of the conversion process, the rabbi is supposed to tell the potential convert at the time that they're doing the ritual circumcision and the immersion, if needed, the ritual circumcision, that this is the one mitzvah that when you convert to being a Jew, you need to carry out. Does anybody have an idea what that particular mitzvah would be? If you do, you get the A star today, because it's a tough one. Well, I won't keep you in suspense anymore. It's found on page 727 of the Eitz Chaim, and I'll read it to you, save us time. One you've seen in different forms. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. Why? For I am the Lord your God. And last week, we had those same obligations, but it also added one. You shall not pick your vineyard bare or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. We also have similar notions of Jubilee year, when you have to, if you've taken a loan or you took somebody's property, you have to return it to them. So the question is, anybody want to take a guess? What is the basis for these three teachings about leaving your fields, not picking up what you drop when you're first harvesting it, and then not picking up anything that when you're taking it to the barn? But you have to leave at least 1/60th of your total field for the poor and the stranger. And you should leave more, is what the Torah and the Talmud teaches. What is the underlying rationale for that, do you think?
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm not sure, but I was, it seems to me from my Cheder days, they used to talk that the reason that the Torah gives is because God says, because I'm holy, this is why you do it. But
okay.
Obviously there is something else you're looking for.
Well, that's clearly one, that's it, because especially in Kiddushin, Stuart, you're supposed to emulate the ways of God. And if God is holy, then we're supposed to act in a holy way also. That's unquestioned. You are right from Cheder. You listen carefully, much better than I did. What our tradition teaches us that is so alien to today is no matter how hard we may have worked, and we all work hard, we've all worked hard in our lives for what we have, that the fruit of our hard work does not belong wholly to us. And that is so alien today. I don't want to pay taxes. I don't want to do this. I don't want to give to others. It's a very libertarian approach. Whom then has the right to share in our bounty according to Jewish tradition? The first is God. And that's the basic underlying principle. Is that no matter how hard we work for what we have, it is God that has bestowed upon us the blessings that allowed us to do that. To be in the family that we were raised in, to get the education that we did, to have our intelligence or our resilience, our fortitude, whatever it is. We can only take so much credit. I was, today, I was talking about humility. It's to not keep your glass full all the time. Remember that you're not solely responsible for the good, that whatever the blessings are in your life. And the second thing that our tradition wants to teach us is that we're responsible, not just to ourselves and our families, but to the entire community. The Mishnah outlines and defines what the farmer's obligations were. The first was leket, and that's what the farmers dropped on the ground during the harvesting process. Chekicha, which was the crops that were left behind in the field when you were taking the hay or whatever you were to the barn to keep it from the rain and the cold. And third is payah, which is that portion of the field, not to be less than 1/60th of your field. Courage to do more. And you just left it there. You didn't bother to harvest it. You just left it knowing that the poor and the stranger were going to come onto your field. So the interesting question that Rabbi Schorsch, who was the chancellor at JTS, asked, there was no Internal Revenue Service, there was no big government, there was no Department of Agriculture to ensure that the farmer carried out these restrictions and obligations. What was the means of compliance then? Why was it followed through with? Jeff? Reverence for God, Jeff says. That's one, clearly. I don't want to defy what God, I have that gratitude and appreciation to God. Well, am I going to let God down and be greedy? The other was the community. And I've talked about it before. If my father didn't go to shul on Friday night, he'd get 10 phone calls the next day or Sunday. Len, where were you? Are you okay? We didn't see you at shul on Friday night. If you didn't follow through with these injunctions, your neighbors would see it. No one was a huge landowner. And they'd say something about it to you. You were all in a community together. We've lost that community feel. They didn't need to have the IRS or the Department of Agriculture looking at our shoulders. And I thought about the fact, under a current administration, there's been a real cutback in the IRS. And how many people take advantage of that and say, I don't need the IRS looking over me. I'm going to pay my taxes as if they were checking I knew they were going to check my. And how many people say today, you know, if the odds of 1 in 1,000 that they're going to check my return, maybe I won't report this, or maybe I won't do that. And it's what you said, Stuart. I am the Lord your God is such an important part of this, that there was a power greater than themselves. It's a way of showing gratitude to God. The whole world is God's, we say in the Psalms. And I don't know if people appreciate. The reason that we're supposed to say a blessing before we eat, what the rabbis of the Talmud said, is that since everything is God's in the universe, if we eat God's food without first saying a blessing, it's like stealing from God, the exact word they use. And by saying the blessing, we are therefore having the right to have that food transformed from God's kingdom to our kingdom, and therefore we may have the food to eat it. That was the rationale for saying a blessing before we eat. Again, it's to show that gratitude to God. And the second important message that comes from these teachings about leaving your field and some of the produce goes back to this notion again. Not only is it God's kingdom and that we should have gratitude to God, but we also have an obligation. It's a universal message that we're all part of this human species together. And while first may come our Jewish brethren and sisters, we also have an obligation to the non-Jew. And all of these requirements about burying the dead, about clothing the naked, about feeding the hungry, about leaving the field, it was clear from the Talmud that they applied to the Jew and the non-Jew. And this is 22,000 years ago. And they weren't exactly in a love relationship with their neighbors. But the tradition teaches we are all created in the image of the divine, and therefore all have an obligation to each other. And one of the examples that we find in the Hebrew Bible is the story of Boaz in the book of Ruth. We read the book of Ruth on Shavuot. It's coming up in about a month, less than a month. And he allows Ruth, who was a Moabite woman, a non-Jew, and he said to her, you may well glean in my fields. He had left a portion of his fields for the poor, and he was allowing Ruth, the non-Jew, to glean in his fields. And the Bible makes clear that there was a reward to him for that. He ends up marrying Ruth. They have a son named Jesse. And a non-Jewish woman, a Moabite woman, becomes the grandmother of King David. Jesse was the father of King David. King David was the grandson of a Moabite woman. And it is in our tradition that the line of King David, the Messiah, will come from. There's a teaching that's also found in the Talmud that kind of ties into this notion of having that what we have is not all ours. First of all, is a gift from God, and therefore we owe some of this to God, whether it be tzedakah, a wonderful way to give to certain causes, and the other is to take care of the poor and the needy. And it's a one sentence. The salt of wealth is charity. The salt of wealth is charity. Anybody want to take a stab? One sentence. One brave soul. Bill Scheck. Are you muted? Go ahead.
No, I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
Salt is very important to the flavoring of food, I guess, and it's a charity. Similarly, charity is an obligation of wealth.
Is there a problem with the mic?
Yeah, this thing pops up on the screen, John. Maybe we're the only ones that can see it. And then Jeff just exited out. Go ahead, Bill. I apologize.
Salt is essential to life, and similarly, charity is an essential part of wealth. So if you have the wherewithal to share, it's essential that you do so.
Thank you. Good. Bob.
So I would actually take that to mean that you're actually wealthy when you give things away to people in need more than what you have yourself.
Great. Again, there's no one answer here. I just appreciate everybody's willingness. That's great, Bob. Karen.
Mine is a little more negative. Even though I know salt is so essential, oftentimes we think of salt as sort of the bitterness in life and the salty tears and so on and so forth. So with all that, with wealth, with the privilege of wealth also comes the obligation of tzedakah.
That's beautiful.
Which may not always be as easy to do.
I think that's a great approach to it. I always say that we have such wisdom in our synagogue, and the midrashim, these are all midrashim, they're wonderful. Anybody want to take one more stab? Oh, Lester, great. Unmute though. Ellen, make sure you unmute for Lester.
Salt is a preservative, and therefore it will preserve life if you help people.
Exactly. You know, I read today with Hode, and it says, if we can let some of the water, the liquid out of our cup, that will enable us to grow even greater. And the one I was thinking of, yours are all good, great. And that's the beauty, because now I can have 4 different interpretations. Salt is a preservative. And the way that we preserve our wealth is by giving charity to others. If we just are greedy and material, and that's all we want to keep expanding and are not charitable, then according to our tradition, you're not going to maintain what you have. So it wasn't intended to be a lead-in, but it is going to be a lead-in to the importance of charity and tzedakah. Charity, and the board and I are going to be sending out a letter this week that we are establishing together a COVID-19 charity fund, tzedakah fund here at the synagogue. The purpose of the fund is to make donations to local charities, Jewish and non-Jewish, that just need the money more than ever at this particular time. Some of them are in Lawrence. There's some Jewish organizations, and we'll be doing our part as a holy community to respond. We've all been so blessed in this community overall. And to say thank you, God. It just ties into it. Whatever we have, that we express our first gratitude to God for what we have. And secondly, that one of the ways we show that today is by reaching out to our brothers and sisters who are less fortunate, Jewish and non-Jewish. So I'm encouraging everybody on the board, myself, we're all making some kind of donation to it. And I think we'll all be proud. We have no control over this terrible pandemic. But we do have control over how we respond and do our part to help those that are just so devastated by this. So I just encourage everybody to the best of your ability, if you can, to make a donation. Just write a check or whatever, let Amy know how you want to make it, and she'll be keeping the record, and we'll start dispensing the money hopefully by the end of next week. So Shabbat Shalom to everybody. And I just want to again give everybody the priestly blessing. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May Adonai bless us and keep us healthy, watch over us and protect us. Yorev Adonai panav alecha v'hunecha. May Adonai cause God's spirit to shine upon us and our families, to be gracious unto you. And may we always be reflections of this love and compassion and kindness that God shines upon us. Yisa Adonai panav alecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May Adonai turn God's spirit upon you, grant you good health and peace. Amen. We turn now to page 153.